Okay. Uh, and yeah, so without further ado, everybody here are HPAC people, so we don't need to introduce. Although, John, you're well known in the kind of geoengineering world, and I assume people know you quite well. So let's take it over, John.
So, this is what I'm trying to talk about from the perspective of the Arctic or the polar regions in particular. And I want to, well, emphasize why and what we might gain from engaging positively with the locals. So, I guess you guys probably don't need much of an introduction
John,
about
I'm sorry.
how.
If you could speak up a little bit, I'm here outside and it's kind of noisy. I don't know if other people can hear you well, but
Yeah,
as
it's
much as you can.
John's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. Thank you.
Okay, not quite sure why that's a problem. It usually works okay. Is it any
Oh,
better
it may
like
not be
this?
your problem. It may be my problem. So,
It probably is, Ron. Go ahead,
Okay.
John.
Okay. Yes. And so the last 10,000 years have been very special. Lots of this climate variability recorded in the ice cores from Greenland, mostly reflecting the variations in the North Atlantic climate, particularly strongly during the last glacial period, but remarkably absent since the ice disappeared. So, when talking about tipping points, I think it's very useful to look at when they are expected to occur. And the ones that are closest to the present day tend to be cryospheric in nature. So, this is the collapse of the West Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets and how they would impact AMOC. I think nowadays we would probably think AMOC might be a bit more susceptible than in this figure, which shows a 4-degree threshold for it. But anyway, the West Antarctic ice sheet has a threshold around 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial, which is pretty much where we are. And so that's why I'm focused a little bit in what we've been doing on ice sheets. And indeed, simulations, when people use words like unavoidable collapse and disintegration, then things get a little bit alarming. But of course, people have not generally considered interventions when writing these papers. And the kinds of interventions, again, probably everyone's familiar, essentially three different categories. The long wave modification of the radiation balance, CDR, the short wave modification, and something that I've worked on a lot is the targeted interventions that are not focused on the global radiation balance, but aim to preserve certain critical parts of the ecosystem or the general Earth system itself. Now, in the University of the Arctic, we have been doing a review of all the interventions proposed at high latitudes, and we use 12 different dimensions for this, and it's all gone into some detail in climateinterventions.org. I think it's quite a nice website, and these 12 dimensions allow us to make a preliminary and very personal, in my case, view of which intervention ideas might be the most useful and might also be better from the governance perspective in looking at these particular different factors that we have. So basically, everything in the top right might be considered good, and everything in the bottom left bad, in sort of crude terms. And if we focused on the top right, the good category, then we can see the usual sorts of suspects like stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, and also the carbon dioxide removal methods. But it's interesting that there are a lot of other interventions there that don't receive that much support and notice in general. And it might be because they're very uncertain. That's why some things have huge error bars because we couldn't make a good estimate in those particular aspects, those dimensions. And the bluer this symbol is, it's the better globally, and the bigger it is better for the polar regions, in our estimation. Now, that was phase one. But what we're trying to do is a parallel process between indigenous groups led by Sami Council and a kind of a mini IPCC academic pathway. And we've begun with sea ice sheets, and atmospheres, with a particular emphasis on the experts trying to look at timeliness and scalability, basically to try to thin down these 61 ideas into potential targets that we can apply for funding. And then the Indigenous Review are entirely independent, and they're using their own types of methodologies, such as their traditional knowledge, but also uh, their kinds of expertise in the ecosystems and the historical uh, information that they have, and the real natural variability that they have. So that's ongoing at the moment. That's been running for about a year, and we expect the first reports to come out in about a month or so. Um, and then we will expand it to the next sets are in industry, permafrost, and ocean intervention domains. I think it's worth emphasizing that some things, in particular in the cryosphere, are not very sensitive to radiative balance. And particularly when it comes to the ice sheets, these things are dangerous because they can reach a geometric instability, whereby essentially they fall into the sea, having lost their supporting ice shelves. And at that point, they don't care about the radiative forcing at all. You need to supply extra buttressing support. So, in the case of Thwaites Glacier or the Doomsday Glacier, this means that simply SAI or MCB will not do the job, as this character here is swaddled in this warm coat and a hat, and he's got a parasol up blocking the sunlight, but of course, 6 months of the year there is no incoming sunlight anyway.
John, could I
Yes.
just a quick procedural thing? Usually we have other people joining during the meeting, and nobody extra has
Oh,
joined. I just wanted to check with Ron whether he's keeping an eye on the
yeah,
waiting
yeah.
room.
Good call, Robert. Let me just make sure. Uh, I don't see anybody right now. It should pop up for me when people are
Oh, good.
trying to
Okay,
join.
sorry. I
Yeah,
just
thank
wanted to
you.
check
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
we just got
No
a small
problem.
number. Sorry for
Yeah.
the interruption, John.
No, 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 it's fine. So now this marine ice sheet instability is not for every glacier around all of the coastline. It's particularly focused in the particular areas where the seabed is deeper further inland than it is at the coast, the termination of the glaciers. And you can see that there's a few places in Greenland and particularly in West Antarctica, the Amundsen Sea sector, that can raise global sea levels by multiple meters over some time scale that we're not exactly sure of. Models range from saying we're already too late to perhaps we have 200 years. It's very difficult to say. It's not a simple temperature threshold. It also depends on how fast the buttressing that exists on the bedrock from the ice shelves that's being melted is going to be around for. How much buttressing is enough buttressing? But it's very clear in models that the Amundsen Sea sector is the first to go, and obviously costs are simply enormous, about $700 billion per year per meter of sea level rise. And that's even putting in about 40 billion per year into sea level defenses. That if that was not done, the costs and damages would be 10 times larger than this number. And this destabilization of the Amundsen Sea sector has knock-on effects to the inflows of the other big ice shelves, the Ross and the Ronnie ice shelf. And these salinities are already changing around Antarctica as a result of Amundsen Sea collapse, and that will only accelerate the potential tipping points of the other glaciers, which only a few models have done so far, but they're expected around 2.5 and 3.5 degrees above pre-industrial. And then you're looking at, well, a lot of ice going into the ocean, raising sea levels by many meters. But one thing that I think is important to consider is how people make decisions. In a way, the rational or the technocratic is very much subsumed to emotions. And the kinds of approaches that academia has been using for the last 50 years is essentially the stick applied to the donkey being governments or public opinion, that simply telling people bad things will happen unless governments change their policies hasn't worked, in my opinion. It relies on fear. It drives populism. People switch off. They don't want to, imagine themselves on an unprotected individual facing a predator on the plane. They'd rather turn around and look in the opposite direction. So it's not been a total success. What we are, in fact, suggesting is trying to present a new paradigm, which is what we call compassionate harm reduction, or simply a carrot-based approach that relies on people's feelings of altruism and a shared humanity. And that gives a positive feeling and, in fact, a moral responsibility to explore all methods to reduce the damage overall. So that leads to, that's what essentially I would classify as love of our fellow human beings, but also a love of place, which is a kind of solastalgia feeling that philosophers call this love of a time and a place, that of course is threatened by climate change. Now, I've mostly been talking about Antarctica, but it's so much easier to deal with issues in the Arctic. It's about 1,000 times cheaper, far closer. But the Arctic is not empty. 4 million people live there. But the changes are very obvious because of the 4 times greater speed at which the Arctic is warming. Some people have said, well, why should Greenlanders care about sea level? But when we asked them, it was very clear why. They have empathy with threatened peoples, especially in the global south. And also that the ice itself would be a tremendously valuable asset, far more than the rare earths or other minerals that are lying beneath the ice sheet. Even 1 millimeter of ice, if it was kept, would be worth about $700 million per year, which is certainly worth a lot more than much of their minerals. But it's entirely Greenland's choice if they want to go down this pathway or not. And indeed, all of the indigenous groups in the Arctic tend to adopt this view that no research or no interventions can be done there without consulting us thoroughly. And that makes perfect sense because there is no chance of a successful intervention without the knowledge of the local experts. I mean, everybody knows the so-called heroic, amateurish exploits of Falcon Scott in the Antarctic, but compare that with Roald Amundsen or Fridtjof Nansen that took the time to learn from local peoples how to work in those particular conditions. So that's how it benefits, if you like, the academic side of things. But we are dealing with huge amounts of mistrust on the part of the Arctic peoples. For example, the Danes in Greenland have always thought of themselves as taking great care of these backward folk there, and that it's actually not been a profit motivated thing. But the reality of colonialism is that, in fact, it has been. Denmark has made enormous amounts of wealth. Much of Copenhagen's great buildings were financed on the natural wealth of Greenland. Uh, just the same as Britain was financed largely through its colonial empire as well. But the Danes are very much, in a sense, unfamiliar with their history. And that even includes the forced sterilization and implantation of birth control devices into Greenlandic women without their consent, which is arguably a act of genocide. And again, I don't think people in Denmark are comfortable with that notion at all. And as in the case, I'm not singling out Denmark in particular, but all of the Arctic states, with the exception of Iceland, which doesn't have an indigenous population, have done terrible things to the people that live there, often not through direct legal force, but by this eagerness of the weak-minded to satisfy their superiors and obey in advance. That certainly led to the near extinction of the Sami languages in the Nordic countries, for example, which were banned in schools for no good reason at all for a long time. So I want to just show an example of how, for example, we have been trying to engage with local peoples and through a school in Ilulissat, through the high school. And Ilulissat is the third largest town in Greenland. And we tried to explain what was happening, what they might expect for their particular environment as nature removed the ice sheet. And just finally, I would like to end with, I think, something that is not super well known, at least it wasn't to me until I pondered it, that the US's view, the American view on nature and humanity, is actually quite an outlier when we look at global concerns. That ecocentrism or the relationship that man is a part of nature is something so fundamental to much of the global south. For example, irrigation and dams were established in China beginning over 2,000 years ago. And that limited supply of land and resources led to a understanding that man had to live in a sort of sustainable way with nature as a sort of gardener rather than an exploiter, pure and simple. And I think the US, of course, dominates the discourse in geoengineering. And it's a strange situation that we have people with, I think, a fundamentally different kind of worldview for nature than most of the planet actually has on this. So, yeah, I'll finish there. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, John. That was really interesting. So our normal procedure is, yeah, we open it up to questions. I see Greg already has his hand up, and I'll just try and keep the queue in order. And every once in a while, I may interject a question as well. But let's just start with that. Greg?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it. Um, just a couple, I mean, the point I would like to make is that the geoengineering methods are essentially technical methods. And although one can have whatever respect for thousands of years of ancient tribal wisdom, I mean, to put it bluntly, they're not equipped to evaluate technical means. The other thing I would say is that it is an imposition on Greenland uh, to impose technical means without their permission. On the other hand, it's an imposition on the rest of the world, on 8 billion people, to say Greenland gets to decide whether we have 4 meters of sea level rise or whatever it is. So this to me is a fundamental uh, ambiguity or difficulty in deciding how much you involve people of anywhere who don't really know what they're talking about. I mean, this sounds horrible, but I'd like you to.
Yeah, it's a thanks for the honesty, and of course it is a point to address. The first thing I would say is that in fact there are indigenous people with PhDs in physics, for example, that clearly have the intellectual wherewithal to understand the merits of particular interventions or not. But this is why in Arctic we are doing these reviews in parallel. For example, it might be a fantastic intervention, but morally speaking, we can't ask people to accept the destruction of their environment or way of life, even if it benefits many people. I strongly believe that the means, the end does not justify the means. The means have to be justifiable on their own. So what this means in practice is that both the locals and the globe, if you like, must be winners. There can be no losers. And I don't see a reason why that cannot happen. I think that we can have the example of the sea ice thickening that's being done in Cambridge Bay. So the group of people that are doing that went to several different, I think at least 5 different communities in Canada and asked them if they would like this work to be done until they found one that said yes, because we can see the advantages. It helps preserve our way of life and allows us to do the things we want to do, and it doesn't seem to have any obvious drawbacks. So that's a case of win-win. And I think that with these targeted interventions, that is something that we can do in a general sort of way, because those are local jurisdictions in general, especially in Canada, where the legal right is devolved to the lowest community level possible. And you can, in a way, rely on the envy of other communities to say, oh, look, they're still traveling on the sea ice very safely. Maybe we should have the same thing being done here. And so it becomes a case of a demand stimulated that allows this intervention to proceed rather than the situation that we have now, where in a sense there's an oversupply and not much demand for geoengineering at the local level.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, John. Mike.
Hi, John. Very interesting. So, this past October, I was on a cruise of the Baltic nations just because I wanted to see them and visit and hadn't been there into many. And I guess one of the things I noticed was how low the coastlines are of many of the nations in that region, and then spreading all the way around down to the Netherlands and Belgium and everything, London and everything. And so taking the Baltic and North Sea as a complex. And I was sort of thinking about how different the world would have been, the world coastlines in that region would have been if Greenland weren't there. If Greenland, 7 meters or 6 meters of sea level rise had melted and how much higher there, the coastline, I mean, the Netherlands would hardly have been possible. And the coastlines would have been just very different. And so I guess I'm wondering if those nations, and I guess I then looked on the web. Well, has anybody planned putting a dam around there from Britain to Norway? And there was a plan, but 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 if you do a water balance on that region, it actually generates more water than it evaporates, and so sea level would rise with a dam. You'd have a hard time pumping out all the water
Yes.
and doing it. And so I guess I wonder if these nations sort of realize what's at risk and have a special interest in this issue that might be, sort of world leading. I mean, there are other places too, Vietnam and Southeast Asia and other things, but I would think there would be an awful lot of countries, coastal countries with low-lying areas that would be much more interested in this as the metric to be thinking about for climate change than temperature change. And
Absolutely
yet
right.
I just don't see that. And when I've tried that on the scientific community, their comment is, well, we'll be dead from heat before we're dead from sea level rise, and so we'll focus on only temperature. And you probably remember, and maybe you were a part of it, that IPCC last assessment in the draft chapters, which had high confidence that sea level rise by 2100 would be less than a meter. And we sort of helped prompt Sir David to lead an effort and write and at least get that dashed line put on the chart that it
Mm,
could be much higher. So I guess
yeah.
I'm surprised there isn't much more interest in this whole, much more political interest in the sea level issue.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that places like the Netherlands have active research in sea level and sea level interventions. For example, one of the groups doing the sea ice thickening work, I know that's not sea level, but are based in Delft. And yeah, there is definitely an interest. And similarly with Singapore, there has been some interest in looking at intervention work there. I think that a large part of the problem has been fear at the policymaker levels of trying to get engaged in this and the blowback that will come from sort of extreme environmental groups and indeed academia as a whole. People have been so obsessed with mitigate, mitigate, mitigate that they don't want to think about any other tools that might be in the box and available for it. So I don't think it's and the other point as well, I think I'm against introducing another stick to beat people with. I don't think we need an extra sea level threat to go along with got what we've got. If people understand, and I think it's not that complicated a point that sea level is going to respond differently than global temperatures to any kinds of interventions, then that's fine. There is no single cure-all for everything. But I think at this point, as I said, we need to move away from the stick and threatening people and trying to look and how can we solve the problem in a piecemeal fashion instead of a whole great big issue, single monolithic chunk.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to make some comments after Robert, though. So this is getting very interesting.
Okay,
Robert.
well, thanks so much, John. I thought I was really impressed by your presentation and your slides and your whole approach. I think combining the science and the cultural dimensions of these challenges is essential. And I quite liked your critique of the the American view. It's something that I've studied. I'm Australian. It's something I've studied quite a lot in terms of the alienation between culture and nature. And in the US, there are phenomena such as the 40% of people who support young Earth creationism, which I think is quite a corruption of the political culture in the United States. But I wanted to focus on the Sami, and I completely endorse your argument of the need for respect for the dignity of indigenous cultures, and you must be very familiar with the whole problem that Harvard University had with the Scopex proposal in Sweden. And so I was really quite interested to see your comment about engagement with the Sami community, and wanting to like David Keith seemed a bit perplexed, the leader of the Scopex Harvard project, as to why such a simple precursor with no climate impact could be rejected as a slippery slope. That seemed to be the impression that I had of the politics of it, and also upset about the strong involvement, as you mentioned, of environmental NGOs who've campaigned very aggressively, and often in quite an irrational way, I would say, around these issues. So interested in your comments on that episode and issues.
Yeah. I know. For me, it's one of the most astounding things that 5 years ago, Sami Council were basically canning the Scopex experiment, and now they are leading this assessment from the Indigenous perspective in concert with the other five permanent participant Indigenous groups that make up the Arctic Council, along with the 8 states in the Arctic. And I think this is been possible because the University of the Arctic is a trusted provider of information. It's a grassroots organization in large part, and it's always been by the Arctic for the Arctic. So it's something that I think is unique elsewhere in the world, that you have this high level of trustworthy information. And it's been on the basis of 25, 30 years of relationship building that has allowed UArctic to go in there and say, it's clear, Harvard did it the wrong way. I mean, not deliberately and not evilly, but they just made mistakes. And everybody makes mistakes. And sometimes you can get over them and sometimes you can't. But the first most crucial step that, of course, the local people want is that their dignity is respected. And that means to go in there and from the beginning ask their opinions on it. What are their concerns? What are the pros, of doing an intervention versus doing nothing? And I think it's very similar to the Great Barrier Reef marine cloud brightening experience when I've talked to those guys, that you just have to go in there and not be, the famous professor or intimidate people with a bunch of letters after their name. You have to go and even not even be in the room, but let them come to their sorts of concerns and then talk about them together, and see where we can go forwards. I mean, I think the word is braiding that people use to combine the traditional knowledge with the Western type of format. And it is, I try to show how win-win it is. If you would just miss so much important if you didn't take into account what their knowledge is and just relied on what your instruments were saying. So in terms of the Sami and Scopex, fundamentally, I think, and without trying to put my words in their mouths, I think the main thing was that they were not asked as partners from the start what would be the implications, and how to do it in the right kinds of way. I think that as you say, the objective reality was not really a problem. It was all about the way, not the what was planned.
And so you have, like, for example, Greta Thunberg has said that geoengineering represents a continuation of the technocratic mentality that has caused problems. And so
Mm.
that's a part of the political, cultural context for this debate.
Yes, but she's certainly also been one of our main contacts with Sami Council, and it's fine to have opposing views or differing views. I think that's what you would expect. Not everybody's going to be on the same page. So you just have to accept that. But the fact that they are sitting down and talking about this and not just, switching off and turning away, I think is a tremendously important step.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mike, I think your hand is still up. Did you want, anyway, why don't you, if you want to do a follow-up,
Yeah, well, I have a couple of
yeah.
other
Let me
points
just,
I'd like to that's completely different.
uh,
So
can
if you want to go
can I
first, go
just,
ahead.
okay, okay. Uh, so, so John, I really appreciate your perspective. And I mean, I'm from the left myself, as may be obvious from my bio. Uh, and I think you're correct. I mean, it's great what you're doing, and you and the University of Arctic and the Upper Arctic people and so forth. Working with indigenous people and other people to try and uh, uh, um, explain the situation and hopefully that in fact, if we don't do some kind of intervention, where all of us are going to be in terrible situations. And in fact, we've done as you may have, I think I sent you a similar kind of analysis where we're looking at
Mm.
what would be the most
Yes.
quickest and globally effective near-term cooling methods that honestly, we think we really need to get started on right away. In fact, we have that open letter that we're urging people to sign for testing and piloting. And I think, so I think um, there are local and global issues involved here, and at the local level, I think absolutely, it is extremely important to get local support, local agreement, local understanding, and hopefully, what I'm hoping is through, I mean, I'm always hoping, but the work that you and many others in the Nordic regions and now as I said, I've been reaching out to Iceland because they just declared an emergency from the AMOC. So I thought, oh, maybe they will finally. We need somebody to support our appeal to the IMO to try and relax those sulfate emissions and just enforce them in populated areas and port areas where you get almost the same health benefits and most of the climate cooling benefits by doing that, and also work on other ways, other possibilities for benign tropospheric aerosols to keep the cooling when you switch over to non-fossil fuels. So, we've been I've been trying to call them up, and I've been unable so far to talk to anybody. But so I think the issue is how to balance these efforts, because my thinking is we could start local. We could start with the testing and piloting in local areas, and in the Arctic in particular, it's particularly important. And as I think you're implicitly noting, you need balance. If you're going to get substantial cooling in the Arctic, you probably have to do this in the Antarctic as well to keep the global balance. But initially, we could do the piloting and testing in local areas where we hopefully can get support in local jurisdictions, and then kind of, try and engender trust from that process. So my question is, well, before I do want to just I've said enough, but anyway, maybe I'll get back to this some other time. But I'm wondering what's your response to that kind of effort? Because I think our work is very much complementary, and frankly, I think it would be great if we could all kind of coordinate and work with each other to try and get some kind of movement, some kind of recognition of how important it is to cool, how urgent it is for everyone.
Yes. Yes. The short answer is that I don't think anybody knows the correct way to go about getting this change done. Everyone should try their own approach and see if it works, And I think that's in a way better to have this sort of uncoordinated, everybody trying their own bit. But I don't know. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps it would be better for people to be coordinated. But I'm also sure that immediately people would be saying, well, those guys, they love something and we're not really for that. And that these small differences can sometimes, that's always been a problem with the left, hasn't it? If you go back to Life of Brian and you talk about the People's Popular Front of Judea and compared with the Popular Front for Judea. And, these arguments amongst people that are 99% aligned can often be a distraction from actually trying to move, don't let the good be the enemy of the perfect be the enemy of the good, basically. And I think, I don't know, when it comes to things like the IMO regulations, it just seems so backwards thinking to try to remove a regulation that's in general cleaning up the world. And of course, marine cloud brighteners are not proposing to put out ships with massive smokestacks or anything at all. So maybe the way is to say, well, can we develop or quickly put on ships that have these sea salt type sprayers and get an effort for that so that it's benign and it looks like you're getting the climate benefit without any negative health kinds of risks. So I would like to see not kind of backpedaling on good regulations, but let's see how we could move it forward. But I know it's horribly slow, and I know that there's this impending sense of doom almost that we have to do something, and the fear as well that some governments or individuals are going to be panicked into a unilateral type of intervention without having done the scientific research to understand it, which can be enormously counterproductive in the end when something unforeseen happens. So I don't know. My short answer is I think it's like Tolstoy's thing that, unhappy families are all different and happy ones are all exactly the same. But we don't know how to have a happy family exactly. So we have to try these different approaches and just then go for the ones that work as fast as possible. Like this kind of 61 ideas, you can immediately eliminate probably 30 of them, but you can also then get it down to maybe 12 or something like that. That could be maybe they take 50 million each to throw them away. But even if you're left with two or three, that's going to have enormous payoff at the end of the day.
Thank you, John. I just want to just follow up quickly before I think we'll go, and then Mike, we'll let the people that haven't spoken yet and get back to Mike for a follow up. If so, what we're asking is for them to study this, because there was a study before the 2020 when they went into effect that actually a modeling study that suggested that this would be the result if you just put the regulations in the ports and relax them in the high seas. However, we're also proposing that they go ahead with the salt, actually, what Clive and Franz are working on, and we specifically cite their work for a benign tropospheric aerosol substitution. So I mean, I think that if they study it, the point is to just get them to start thinking about the importance of cooling one way or the other, and not double down. I mean, they recently just did the same thing in Mediterranean, so they're repeated the same mistake, and just it's part of the general taboo of thinking about cooling. And this is one way we think it's not just, I mean, it could get maybe 0.2 C or some, substantial reduction in the termination shock that's been caused by this. But it also is a public policy effort, to get people to think about the importance of cooling and not just greenhouse gas emissions. So anyway, I'll stop there. I don't know if you want to respond to that, or should we just go on?
No, let's move on to some of the other
Okay.
points.
So our next person is John Nissen.
Yes, please. Yeah. When I was at one of the COP meetings, I noticed a door open as it was now a closed door with something about Nordic discussions on the door, and I thought these might be people who would, be wanting to protect the Arctic. So I barged in and said, there's a real crisis in the Arctic, and they said, we don't want you here. Go out and leave the room immediately. So I went out, and then one of their men came out and talked to me and said, there's absolutely, you're completely wasting your time. So that made me realize that the powers that be want the Arctic to be exploited. And then we've got now Donald Trump to absolutely confirm that. He can claim it's a security issue, but actually he's greedy. He wants to exploit the resources of Greenland, and then possibly he'll take over Iceland. I mean, but he's not alone. There are all other governments in the Arctic Council are wanting to exploit the Arctic. So anything to try and reduce the temperature in the Arctic or preserve Greenland is against huge forces around from all these nations, which of course ironically include some European countries as well as the US, and probably Russia as well. So we need to draw attention to the implications of letting Greenland melt down. And I'm interested. Where did you get the figure of? Was it 7 billion, or was it 700 billion dollars
Okay,
per millimeter?
Yeah, that comes from a paper by Brown et al. 2022. Yeah, so that I can find the link and put it in the chat if you like.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Our particular way of thinking about our theory of change, if you like, is actually very much to go through the indigenous communities, not the states in the Arctic. Because, as I said, there are these 5 indigenous communities, and I think they carry enormous moral weight, and it will be difficult to do a colonialist type of approach if it's clearly against the local people's interests, which is obviously the only reason why Trump's not taking over Greenland already. There is clearly a massive backlash awaiting such a rash kind of move. But I think, again, we're just trying to make this up as we go along, and I don't know if maybe our way is a stupid way. We don't know.
And what I'm proposing is to put all our thoughts together on the importance of preserving the Arctic um, in a press release. I've got a friend who's good at sending release notices to Reuters and all the other publishing groups. That's one of his, that's his profession doing that. And
Yeah.
he's offered to help me. So I've got a way that I might be able to get something published. And I think this sea level rise thing is the most obvious thing. The climate change which the Arctic is producing because of reducing the temperature gradient and upsetting um, the jet stream. It is
Yeah.
it is also terribly important, and also the AMOC, which is almost certainly going to be disrupted if things carry on very
Yeah.
much longer.
Uh, John, just so you know, we were trying to end on the hour as people are already leaving for the Mere
Yeah.
Talk, but so let's try, and we have John Cole and Mike still on the queue.
Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you.
I need some money from you. I need some money from you.
Yep.
John,
Yep.
you're
Oh,
muted,
sorry.
John.
So
John
my
Cole, you're
wife has
muted.
my wife
Why
has
asking
appeared.
money?
Just the final point is that I would appreciate help with producing this report from everybody, especially you, John. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah.
John Cole, are you there?
Yeah. Hello?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, John Moore, I put my questions into the chat. Were you able to read
Yeah.
them? So
Yes.
address those two. Thank you.
Well, first thing is that I don't think we understand AMOC well enough to know how sensitive it is. I mean, all I can say is that all of the observations are slowing down, and the models looking at things like the statistical variability suggest that it might be approaching a threshold. I think that certainly if we did something to try to slow the freshwater input, and it's particularly the decline in sea ice, I think sea ice is one of the key drivers. That's at least what we found by looking at causality relationships under 3 different kinds of geoengineering that we published a couple of years ago. So, and then your second point about how would the culture of Greenland, the people of Greenland, respond to an offer of $10 million each? I think that it it might be, I'm sure it'd be welcomed by some. I doubt it would be welcomed by a majority because I think it's unlikely there would be $10 million on offer each because that would amount to about $500 billion. And I don't know if the US has got money to put in like that. But there is also the tremendous damage that people see for American indigenous cultures. And basically, no one in the Arctic wants to go that direction. They enjoy their mental well-being of pursuing their traditional ways of life, and things like keeping dogs and going out on the ice is tremendously important to them as individuals. Now, of course, there can be people that would take the offer. I'm sure there would be people who would take the offer, but it certainly wouldn't be 100%. And I don't know if they would be happy with the money that they get. Who knows? I really don't know.
Thanks. And if we do follow the models of the AMOC to the idea that the winter temperatures in Northern Europe and Greenland would drop possibly as much as 10 degrees Celsius for the winter time, do you think that might be enough energy change to halt the net loss of ice on the Greenland continent?
No, and I don't believe those numbers actually. I think that if I live in Rovaniemi, which is on the Arctic Circle, it's 12 hours opposite from Fairbanks. The climate of Fairbanks and Rovaniemi are not that dissimilar, in fact. And even though we have the big influence of AMOC, for me, the key impact of AMOC shutdown would be the massive increase in heat that would be released in North Africa and Southern Europe, which is likely to be far more health threatening and damaging than even 10-degree colder winters. It's in a way it would be nice, and I speak from somewhere it's minus 30 at the moment. So it's not particularly pleasant, but on the other hand, we have dealt with things like ticks migrating northwards. A good friend of mine was in a coma a couple of years ago for 2 weeks because of a tick bite. We are not used to handling those kinds of pests here. Um, it would certainly have some kind of an amelioration on sea ice loss, but beyond that, I don't know if it would be enough, frankly.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yeah, Mike, Mike will be our last speaker, I think, unless we want to extend the meeting. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, we've all heard Paul before on the very same topic, so let's finish this one if we can. So, John, a couple of things. During the Arctic assessment that was held, the first one, when I was on the steering committee for, in the end, or the synthesis committee, I guess, there were some remarks by indigenous people that took a while to understand. One was they said that climate change would destroy their culture. And the second was that predictability of weather is becoming, the weather is becoming less predictable. And by what they were basically saying on the first one was that climate change essentially is going to destroy subsistence gathering of things, and the community culture they have that is focused around capturing a whale and all getting the foods, and they're going to have to go to a money economy, which they weren't used to and didn't want to think about and didn't really want to change. They figured out how to survive in the Arctic was having a social community where everybody helped each other. If you were an individualist and couldn't capture your seal for the winter, you died. So individualists died and everything. And then on the weather becoming less predictable, that was something that took us quite a while to understand because we're from the modeling community. But what they were saying was all the collective empirical wisdom that they've gathered about how the Arctic behaves, how sea ice behaves, that they depend on is becoming useless to them or something. I mean, it's just not consistent anymore. And they were very concerned. During the U.S. national assessment, we heard similar things from some of the tribal groups or something like that. And actually in the northeastern U.S., they blamed what was happening for the breakdown of their society. They have this oral tradition that they pass on, and elder wisdom, and a whole structure of things that are established, and that's all being destroyed. And so I guess I would think that there would be some real interest in, aren't there things that can really be done to try and help preserve the situation so that they can have, can continue their cultural things. Now, I'm all for consulting with them. That's what we're doing in the Arctic assessment, but it was very interesting. And I might just add one other thing. It's very strange because I also do some things with Sumitru Das and everything, and think about the tropics where the rising heat index or wet bulb temperature or however you want to call it is going to, is reaching near fatal levels or something, and heat waves. And then when we talk about this American view and who's mostly talking about climate intervention, it's mostly the people with air conditioning. It isn't, we're talking about what is affecting them, and they should be the ones who are leading an effort to try and keep the temperatures cool enough to live where they are. So I guess I'm a little surprised at the indigenous reluctance views. And your comment about colonialism sort of capturing their, setting the perspective, I think is very interesting. But it would seem a longer discussion with them might actually get them to along with the people in the equatorial regions, to be the leaders on it, rather than.
I totally agree. I totally agree, Mike. I think that there is a natural sort of synergy between the global south and the Arctic peoples. And we have indeed tried to foster that, and we talk with the small island states leadership and people of that kind. I think that it's exactly as you said, it's the mid-latitudinous, as I call them, that are living in their highly insulated and technologically secure environments that are, in a sense, the problem. And uh, these people, the global south and the Arctic peoples, have enormous moral weight, and that's the kind of thing that we are essentially relying on. But how that stands up in the face of naked greed, let's say, I don't know where we will go, but we just have to keep trying, don't we? I'm sure you agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Well, it was very interesting
Yeah, they're nice of you
to
to
hear,
join
and
in, Mike.
I mean,
Good
it's
to see you
fascinating
again.
to listen to the indigenous. It turned out in the U.S. when we did the U.S. national assessment, and we divided into regions, a few indigenous people came to us and said, well, you're asking in each of these regions the top three issues. We're not in the top three issues in any particular region.
Yeah.
But if you look across the country as a whole, we have 2 or 3% of the land and a whole bunch of other things. And so we started a separate one, and I ended up becoming a liaison to that. And so you picked up a lot of these indigenous stories, which is really great wisdom. I mean, they provide great wisdom and thought on it, but it is interesting to try and translate that to how we think. I mean, the predictability issue was really just fascinating to understand
Yeah.
how their system worked for them much better than any numerical model system possibly worked, and it was being destroyed. And that was,
Well, I think that also it is true that the climate is getting more variable. There is increased variance in the system. So it's both true that the mean is moving, but also the variance, and that's a
well, their
problem.
specific thing was, though, that people were assuming the ice would stay attached to the land for longer periods. And so they were having to do more and more rescues of people
Yeah.
who were out on ice floes going out there and not always succeeding, but that there were changes in the sequencing of the weather that was having great effects on them, and very interesting.
Oh, so thank John, did you want to respond or?
No,
Okay,
I
okay.
totally agree. It's
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I think
correct.
most of our audience has left and we're still recording, so that's good. But um, um, yeah, I think this is a really excellent discussion. I think, it's obviously very valuable work that you and your colleagues are doing, for all of us. Um, I think, I mean, I don't want to prolong this, but I do believe that, um, the scientific method is quite critical for all of this, and we need to get, everybody on board that, there's evidence that we need to confront, we need to challenge. It's a particular problem in the U.S. So and that it's true that the early Enlightenment folks, Marx and, well, that's anyway, that the was a very much of a the a sort of a nature is for humans to exploit and use for our own interests, but we do have to get beyond that. So that's where the indigenous cultures could be quite helpful, and frankly, even some of the other non-Western traditions like the Eastern traditions and so forth, they're, I think, a lot more in nature, have a more of a component there. But anyway, we could talk about this forever, but um, thank you very much, John. I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to, John, do you have any last thoughts you want to share, or?
No, it's been really nice, good chat, and I want to make sure my kids are settled down because I haven't been forcing them. Okay. All right. So I wish you the best and good night.